Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The toddler, Alfie Evans, who was at the centre of a legal battle over his medical treatment for a degenerative brain disease, has died. His parents said they've been left heartbroken and posted on social media a message that our baby boy grew his wings tonight at 2:30 a.m. Alfie died 5 days after life support was withdrawn at Liverpool's Alderhay Hospital. His parents had staged a series of unsuccessful legal appeals after doctors decided to withdraw life support and campaigners had taken part in noisy, ill-tempered protests outside the hospital. Now, it was a decision that left his victims furious. Earlier this year, the Parole Board ruled that John Warboys, known as the Black Cab Rapist, would be released after spending a decade in jail, despite being suspected of attacking more than 100 women. 2 of the women he attacked successfully challenged that decision, and he remains behind bars. But the controversy led to the resignation of the head of the Parole Board of England and Wales. Now the government has set out plans to reform the system. Kamian Zeram reports.
Black Cab Rapist John Warboys. Public confidence in the criminal justice system was shaken this year when the Parole Board announced Warboys' imminent release. He'd been in jail for less than a decade. He'd been convicted in 2009 of 19 sex offences, with police later suspecting him of committing more than 100. The decision to free him was shrouded in secrecy, and the onus fell on his victims to fight it. They went to the High Court and won. The Justice Secretary today unveiled plans that he says could make it easier to challenge the Parole Board and make their workings more transparent.
The first stage is ensuring that victims are able to have a better understanding of why the Parole Board reaches a decision in respect of an offender. So they'll be publishing the reasons, which will be going to victims and potentially the public more widely. Secondly, we're introducing a reconsideration mechanism led by a judge, so that when a decision has been made by the Parole Board, there's an ability within the Parole Board on appeal, if you like, to look and check to ensure that all the proper factors have been taken into account, which didn't happen with the Warboys case, for example.
Post-Warboys, there are a range of suggested reforms. The blanket ban on secrecy explaining decisions will be lifted, and decisions could be easier to challenge. But by whom? Any member of the public, or just the victim and offender? Should some kinds of high-profile cases, like rape or sex offences, be automatically reviewed? And should hearings be open to the public? The Warboys decision cost Nick Hardwick, the chair of the Parole Board, his job. But the lawyer for the women who challenged Warboys' release says the parole process just needs better funding, not reform. And the biggest mistakes were in fact made by the Ministry of Justice itself, which failed to pass on crucial information about the scale of his suspected offending.
The material relating to Warboys was not put before the Parole Board because of something that went wrong there. And again, cuts left, right and centre in MOJ funding are going to have repercussions eventually. This sticking plaster is not going to address that problem.
One proposal, though, has met with widespread approval: more transparency. Justice, after all, can't be properly done unless it is seen to be done too.
Well, I'm joined now by Nick Hardwick, who was the head of the Parole Board for England and Wales until, as Kami said in that piece, he was forced to resign earlier this year in the wake of the Warboys controversy. Mr. Hardwick, do you think these reforms that the government set out are sufficient to restore public confidence in the Parole Board?
Well, I think there's a big gap between the political rhetoric and what's actually being proposed. The proposals are sensible, but they're relatively limited, and essentially they're doing what I was calling for long before the Warboys case. So they'll enable the Parole Board to publish reasons for its decisions, and the Secretary of State has said they will consult about setting up some kind of review mechanism, but it doesn't go, I think, far enough.
And you were pushing for greater transparency.
I've been pushing for greater transparency since well before the Warboys case. I think there should be, what they're proposing now must only be a first step, and it must go much, much further.
But you were pushing with the department, and how did they respond to your calls?
Well, there was a kind of deafening silence, I think would be the best way to describe it. It wasn't helped by the fact there's been such a turnover of secretaries of state in the Justice Department. So one of the achievements of the very brave women in this case was to actually get this delivered. And it's an important but limited step forward.
I mean, you lost your job, and the High Court ruling said that both the Parole Board and the Ministry of Justice made errors in this case. Do you think that the Justice Secretary should have quit as well, given that you lost your job?
Well, I don't think it's helpful. I mean, it's interesting now about what causes someone to lose their job. But I mean, I'm not complaining about what happened to me, but I am disappointed that the Justice Secretary doesn't seem to me to be taking responsibility for what went wrong in his case.
What do you mean by taking responsibility?
It was his officials that failed to communicate properly with victims. It was his officials that failed to prepare an adequate dossier for the panel to consider. It was his representative at the hearing who didn't press Warboys on the other cases.
But should he have gone, or should his officials or his representative go?
I think it's very difficult to see. I don't see my position as being any different from his.
So he should have quit.
The point isn't about resignations. The point is, if you say it's all the Parole Board's fault, you won't fix the things that need fixing on his side of the house. So this is a job half done because they don't admit what they need to do and what they need to correct.
Nevertheless, I mean, the judges in that High Court ruling did say that you should have looked at John Warboys' other alleged offences, and you said the MOJ, the Ministry of Justice, didn't give you enough details. But details had been in the press about suspected attacks 8 years ago.
You can't, well, 8 years ago. The one thing the panel can't do is Google the case to find out if there's anything they haven't seen. I mean, I've made no bones about it. We got that wrong. We should have looked at those other offences, but the judge said it was a difficult and troubling case with many exceptional features. It does not reflect more widely on the work of the Parole Board, and it would be wrong to suggest so.
I mean, briefly, do you believe that John Warboys could again convince a Parole Board in a new hearing that he's safe for release?
The High Court made it very clear that was a possibility. They said in terms that their judgment should not mean that they don't think Warboys is safe to release, or that they were in any way trying to bind the hands of the next panel. So it'll be a matter for the next panel to consider, but this time considering, but not determining, the other offences Warboys is alleged to have committed.
Nick Hardwick, thank you very much.